thank you, good week. I'm going to introduce our wonderful presenter for tonight. A native of upstate New York, David Handy is a graduate of Union College in Schenectady, where he majored in 19th century American history. In addition to his current book, and the topic of tonight's talk, I Think I Shall See It, Hundred Battles, the Civil War letters of Captain Luther and Willard. David is also the author of The King's Sunday School Boys Go to War, the story of his 77th Venus Pikes Battalion, and my personal favorite, These Few Lines, the Civil War letters of Private Alonzo T. Baum. Presently, a practicing clinical social worker specializing in adolescent and adult psychotherapy, David maintains his love of history through the first-person accounts of those who lived rich lives in the past. And without any further ado, I'd like to turn things over to David Handy for tonight's event.
Good evening, and thanks a lot for having me tonight. I was thinking about when I was a little kid, probably third grade, I loved the Civil War. I have no idea why, because I don't remember watching anything about it, but it just was cool. And I remember in third grade, the third graders, we had our little section, and those books were too simple for me. And another section that had this great Civil War book that I really wanted, but the librarian told me I couldn't read it. I wasn't old enough. Somehow I convinced her, read the book. It was all these little vignettes about some of the battles. I remember mostly the battle above the clouds, you know, when they were fighting back in Chattanooga. I did a book report using that book in 5th grade. I did another book report using that book in 8th grade. And I actually did another one in 11th grade using that book. I got good grades for all of them. When I went to Union College, I originally went to be, pre-med. I was going to be a doctor, and then I got to organic chemistry. A week and a half later, I went to my advisor and said, I'm switching, I'm going to American history, which is something I always really liked too. And then the last semester, in one class, the professor said, I hope none of you are getting a straight history degree. And I'm like, what? And he goes, because you'll never get a job. I had never heard that before, right? So I kind of panicked. The alumni office, they had folders for every major, and in the folders would be information who's coming to campus to recruit for these particular majors. So I opened up the major for history, and it was empty. So I had to switch around. I wound up going to seminary. I was a Methodist minister for 26 years. I also had a degree in counseling, and so I did that at the same time. And then 2006, kids are old, and so I shifted to do just psychotherapy. But in the meantime, I got very interested in the 77th back in the 90s. A group tried to get together and start up, a reenactment group for the 77th. So I went to the casino, rummaged around, found a few letters, found a couple letters from Orrin Rogge and some of the other officers. I came here and I found some letters from Alonzo Baum, which were interesting, but I didn't think too much of it, and I finally had published the history of the 77th. Then I thought, let's go back to Baum, because he seemed kind of interesting, and there were like 30 letters when I first looked, and he has at least 160 letters that are here. So Ann, she, scanned, well, they're already scanned, but she sent them to me, and so in a couple of years of that, I wrote the book, These Few Lines. Baum was a neat guy. He's the kind of person, I don't know, I think if you're at a bar, you'd like to sit next to him. He was just earthy and fun. Then I remembered that Luther Wheeler had some letters. And their copies of them are at the New York Museum in their archives. They're actually a private collection of a woman in Vermont. So I contacted her because I wanted to see the actual copies. I wanted to see his handwriting more clearly. And she was really excited about this whole project that I had. And then I said, I'd love to come up and see the originals because that's really important to me. And she hung up. That was it. So what I got were the copies of them that are down, in Albany. So I guess let's get started, right? Luther Miller Wheeler was born in Lincoln, Massachusetts on November 3rd, 1840. He was one of 4 children of Francis and Abigail Wheeler. He had an older brother, Francis, who he called Frank, a younger brother, William, who was also in the Civil War. He was captured and spent nearly 2 years in Andersonville and survived, but he died fairly early because of what happened there. And then he had a much younger sister named Abigail, who we always called Abby. No letters are written to Abby. She was, that young, but occasionally she wrote one to him, and he was always impressed with her spelling and her ability to write a sentence. That's how young she was. 1849, they moved to Brattleboro, Vermont, and Luther attended the Brattleboro Academy, which focus was in preparing someone to become a teacher. Then in 1856, they relocated to Saratoga Springs, and his father opened a store. I don't know where. I'm thinking maybe on Broadway. He opened up a store, and then Wheeler attended, and I don't know how to pronounce this, Paoli?
Yeah.
Okay, Paoli Durkee's private school, classical school for boys. He was a very open-minded guy. They often had classes outside. He wanted them to enjoy and be creative, and discipline was secondary, whereas at that time, discipline was first. Then maybe you could learn something. The winters of 1858 and 1859, 1860, he taught at a district school in the village, and when not teaching, he assisted his father. He was viewed as very likable. He was highly esteemed by his community. I'm going to read a quote. This quote comes from a short biography of him tacked on to the bylaws of the Luther Wheeler Post for GRA. That's like I said, that's where it came from. And I tried to find it. I don't know where it went. I had a copy of some of that. But this is how he was described. Above the average structure, being 5 foot 10 inches in height, in body robust and sound, in speech somewhat reticent, his countenance animated and winning in expression, and with a presence which even so young a man insensibly inspired respect. His genial disposition and the manliness of his nature had from early youth made him a favorite with his mates. He exhibited those qualities of truthfulness, of earnestness, and singleness of purpose which, as they became developed, ripened into that faithfulness to trust committed to him, and that singular elevation and integrity of character which at all times distinguished him above the average of his fellows. 2 months after witnessing the debacle at Bull Run, James B. McKean, who was a congressman for the district which Saratoga was in, issued a circular from his home calling for a formation of what he called the Bemis Heights Battalion. Benjamin F. Judson, who normally is known as B.F. Judson, actually it's Benjamin Franklin Judson, he immediately started recruiting a company which would be Company C. He opened an office in the Saratogian, and Luther jumped right to it. He offered his help in recruiting, and in turn, Judson offered him the position of first lieutenant. And then pretty much Luther did all of the recruiting because Judson was very frequently out of town. But his mother was against it. In the short biography that I told you about, she was said to, she tried to persuade him from taking any steps that should separate him from her, for he was dearer to her than her own life. Wheeler replied, "Someone has got to go to help put down this rebellion, and I am no better than anyone else that I should be excused. You must give me up as I have given myself up." By mid-October, all 10 companies for the regiment were gathered. They gathered at Camp Schuyler, which was on the fairgrounds of the Saratoga Agricultural Society. Where would that be now, you think? I'm trying to remember. Is that the track or in that area? Well, okay, all right. Okay, well, that's where they went. The 23rd, they were mustered into federal service. They were the 44th Regiment recruited, but in honor of the Battle of Saratoga, 1777, they were named the 77th New York. On the 27th of November, they gathered together to leave and head to Washington. Just before they left, there was a big reception. They were presented the national flag. After that, they boarded a steamer, the Knickerbocker. George Stevens, who is the surgeon, described it this way: an old dismantled craft, unfit for any purpose but the transportation of soldiers, whose deck was covered in mud an inch deep, and where doors having been thrown overboard, a free circulation of the rough November air was allowed in every part. Waldo Potter, also with the Saratogian, he added that there was a want of sufficient space for the boat of nearly 900 men. It soon became palpably evident that after filling the cabin below and the salon and stateroom above, there remained two whole companies utterly destitute of any place to lie down except the wet and muddy deck, who had no protection from the damp and chilly air except their blankets. Officers weren't spared from this because there were no staterooms to stay in at that time. They arrived in New York City the next morning in a fog and it was a steady rain. They marched up and were met by a committee of the Sons of Saratoga, and they were brought to a place to get warm and dry, and they had a great meal. After dinner, they formed ranks again. It finally stopped raining, and they received their Enfields and the regimental flag. They were supposed to get Springfields, but a blockade runner got caught and had 5,000 stand of Enfields, so they had them. And they had the Enfields throughout the whole war. Kind of surprising because the Springfields were probably 90% of what the infantry used. After that, they boarded a ferry. They went across to New Jersey at Amboy, and they took a train to Philadelphia. And that was a wreck. The train was used to transport livestock. So you have an idea what it looked like in there, an idea what it smelled like. They refused to go at first, but there was nowhere else to go, no other else to go. So they got on a train, and then they made it to Philadelphia, which was like coming to the Holy Land. They were really well received. They were given a great meal. They were refreshed. They were happy as can be. Then they boarded another train. This train went 40 miles, and it took them 7 hours to do that. Amazing, right? So finally, after 3 days, right? 3 days it took them to go from Saratoga to Washington. They arrived Sunday morning, December 1st at 4 a.m., and they were escorted to Camp Hill House, which was on the grounds of Commodore David Porter's mansion. I'll give you some of the first impressions that Wheeler had when he arrived there. In a letter written to his folks, he described the countryside. The whole country around us for miles is one vast camp. It is estimated that there is 200,000 men on the other side and 100,000 on this side of the Potomac. Of course, he overestimated that. I was in Washington day before yesterday, went all over the Capitol buildings, never thought of anything so splendid. Went in the House of Representatives, read a part of the president's message. In the streets of Washington, you see nothing but soldiers and thousands of army baggage wagons rumbling through the streets in all directions. All is bustle and confusions. Sometimes there will be a jam of perhaps 1,000 wagons in the street. And then he described in a letter to Frank a little bit more of what he was doing. We are in Camp Hill House on Meridian Hill, about 2 miles from the Capitol. It receives its name from the Meridian Stone, which is on top of the hill, from which the degrees of latitude and longitude are reckoned. I've been to the city but 3 times since we came here. The officers have to get a pass from the acting brigadier general to go through the city, or they would get put into the guardhouse by the provost guards, who are patrolling the city on all the principal streets. They stop every man they meet in uniform. I am very careful not to get down there without a pass. Was down all day yesterday, went first to the patent office, sought a model of every kind of machine ever thought of. It would take a man a year to look for them all. saw Washington's military uniform and sword, also worn by Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans, saw the original Declaration of Independence and the autographs of Napoleon and other great men, went next to the Smithsonian Institute, saw a great many curious relics, but did not have time to see everything. In the afternoon, went all over the Capitol buildings and up on the dome, could see from the dome the whole city and country and any quantity of camps. Washington is the most busy place in the world, I suppose now. Broadway, New York, don't commence with Penn Avenue. The street is crowded with thousands of army wagons carrying provisions to the various parts of the army. The wagons are drawn usually with 4 horses or mules. The driver sits on the back of the 9-wheel horse and drives with one rein attached to one of the horses forward. Our wagoners could not make one rein work and had to get 4 and drive us as we do north. The sidewalks are crowded with soldiers, officers, and pretty women. I never saw so many pretty women as I see here passing up Pennsylvania Avenue. But most of them are the fancy cast, and they are all splendidly dressed. Not surprised he noticed the women, right? One of the things that happened early on for the armies, well, let me back up. Okay, hang on. One of the things that happened when you were together is there was a lot of disease. Mainly, well, early on, mumps, measles came about. When they got down to Washington, typhoid fever, dysentery, not malaria so much, it was there. And there was an epidemic of the flu during that time. So in one letter, he said just one sentence: the new recruits are dying off very fast, one dies every day. Because of complaints sent to Medical Director Brigadier Tripler, he went and inspected the area, the camp, and he described very unhygienic surroundings. The atmosphere is impregnated with the malarial odor rising from the decomposition of animal matter just below an open field, where a large number of dead horses are deposited upon the surface, are allowed to remain and decompose. This, with rather poor policing in the camp, has risen to typhoid fever, from which, I regret to say, we have lost 10 or 12 men already. And as you know, typhoid fever, and this is, dead horses decomposing doesn't cause typhoid fever or dysentery. It's the camp and the inability to police it properly. All the people together, it's easy for a disease to travel quickly through any organization. But Wheeler was healthier, and good Lord, he was never sick. Literally, as far as I can tell. In December 29, 1861, he wrote, "As for me, I have never felt better in my life, have gained 10 pounds, would not come home today for nothing." January 11th, 62, "I have not had a cold since I came here and am growing fat." January 30, 62, "I have never been so healthy in my life. I gained 17 pounds since I came here. I now weigh 117 pounds more than I ever did before. Pretty soon I'll look like father." June 62, when they were along the Chickahominy, there was a tremendous scourge again of typhoid and malaria, reduced the regiment down to 275 effective men. So you get a sense of how bad it was. But at Harrison's Landing, August 62, he says, "I tell you, I'm more healthy and stronger and never needed to rest so little now. Everyone remarks how strong and healthy I am. They say no one stands it like Captain Wheeler." And then finally, May 2nd, 63, the day before he died, he wrote, "I am well, had not been sick enough to mention it." That's quite a deal that he did not get. I mean, good Lord, more people died from disease than any of the battles, the casualties from that. And then there's people who didn't die from disease, but really were invalids the rest of their lives because of the damage that the disease caused. There was the Signal Corps was, regular army. But one day, he was asked and found that he was picked to be on the signal corps. And let me give you a little bit of that. In each brigade, there is picked out 3 lieutenants to learn the Army signals. Colonel McKean had an order the other day to select one from his regiment. The order read that he should pick the best looking, smartest, and most intelligent lieutenant in his regiment. And he appointed me, which was a great compliment to me, I think. I'm going to leave my regiment tomorrow morning and go into camp at Georgetown for a month learning and practicing the signals. It's a lucky thing for me and will be the means of my getting promoted, I think. Adjutant French, that'd be Windsor French, told me tonight that my leaving the company now would be very lucky and be final, as I would get an appointment in the regular army, which is my ambition. You get the idea that Luther is a very confident person. Maybe he thought too highly of himself? Don't know. But he did think well of himself, and it was quite an honor. If you were chosen, you had to pass a test. The test would include reading, writing, arithmetic. I'm glad I didn't take it because math is horrible. Surveying and topography. But he soon, very soon, got bored. He wrote once, "We lead a lazy life here in the signal camp. I go to bed about 8 and lay until 8 in the morning, then get up and go to breakfast, then study and practice 2 hours in the afternoon, and 2 in the forenoon and 2 in the afternoon, then lay around the fire until bedtime." Eventually, he got out with the intervention of Colonel McKean. Another reason he was disillusioned with it, you can see in this something that he wrote to his brother Frank. "Mother thinks the signal service is dangerous. One reason why I wanted to get out of it was because it was not dangerous. In a battle, I should be placed off on a hill somewhere, making signals out of danger when I want to be with the boys, and a little fighting if they see any." He doesn't talk about camp life often with his, to the families when he writes. In one letter, though, he did describe a little bit of what it was like still around Washington. This is a letter to his mother. It was written January 11th, 1962. "I will now tell you something about our camp life. It has rained most all the time for 3 weeks, and the mud is knee-deep. We do not have any drill or even dress parade some days. The mud is over the shoes of the soldiers, and one has to wear boots to get around dry, but most of the company have long-leg boots. We all stay in our tents most of the time and read the newspapers. The papers are brought into camp every day by the newsboys. We get the New York papers the same day they're published, and the Washington papers every day. We have 2 tents now, one in the rear of the other, and a door opening from one into the other. The front one we use to cook room and parlor, and the rear for bedroom. Our bed is made in the way it is made of narrow slats placed lengthwise on a frame as long as a common bedstead. We then have a husk mattress, then 2 or 3 heavy bed quilts, and a woolen sheet to lay on, and have over us 2 woolen blankets and 2 bed quilts. I have never had a better bed at home." I have trouble with that. Sleeping on a corn husk mask, I don't know. Maybe it was comfortable for him, but I can't see it. Anyway, I and Captain Judson sleep together. We then have a smaller bunk for our servant, which most likely would be a contraband who had made it to Washington. Our tent is floored and braced up at the sides. We have already collected enough furniture to go keeping house when the war is over. Okay. Patterson stays in another tent alone and is too lazy to fix it up any, and does not live as comfortable as most of the privates. As for the last, most of them, at a cost of about $1 each, bought boards and made a box the size of their tents and placed the tents on top of that. It almost doubles the room. Patterson, by the way, is Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. He was not well liked by the regiment, and in other letters, it's very clear that Luther does not like him either. As soon as they then have 2 bunks, one above the other, and a little sheet iron stove, which makes them very comfortable. I spend most of my evenings with the boys in their tents. and as soon as I go into any one of their tents, it is sure to be full in moments. We then sing songs and tell stories until the drum beats for light to be out, which is at 9. And at all time, all lights in tents of privates must be out, but the officers can keep lights on at night if they choose. I go into the city often now as there's nothing to do in camp. I go to Congress every time I can go to the city. The officers had it relatively nice. They could stay up all night if they wanted. They also could drink. They could have all the alcohol, no problem there. Privates, no. They didn't want them to have any. I guess they didn't think they could control it. But sure, a lot of officers were drunk in battle, so don't know why that happened.
No.
Well, it's true, right? At Antietam, the commander was Colonel Irwin. He was definitely drunk. He mishandled the regiment terribly, and the next day he was removed from the regiment. So it did happen. Irwin, by the time, was court-martialed twice for drunkenness, so it happens. All right, so let's move on. One of the things, well, let me get back to my notes. Okay. McClellan was, commander of the Army of Potomac. I was commander of everything at the time. And Lincoln had a devil of a time getting him to move the Army at all. McClellan really liked to drill soldiers. He did a good job of that, but he didn't really like to go anywhere. And he didn't like to bring his men into battle. It's just something, he really didn't want his men to die. But it's hard to fight a war when you don't go. We don't go into it. So finally, he was ordered, that's it, you've got to go. He developed a plan for the Army of the Potomac to go down and sail down to the tip of the Virginia Peninsula, and they would march up to Richmond and hopefully take that and then end the war. So March 22nd, the 77th was ordered to Alexandria, and they were told that they were going to be going to the Alexandria Wharves. They didn't know where they were going, they just knew they were going somewhere. Well, they wound up, obviously, going down to the peninsula. They wound up anchored in front of Fortress Monroe, was at the tip of the peninsula. And once they were there and the Army moved, the 77th arrived April 5th at Lee's Mills on the Warwick River, which shocked everybody. All the maps that McClellan had did not show the Warwick River. He was very confused by that. There were dams along that, and that made the Warwick flood somewhat. And then there was throughout, each side had, I don't know how long, hundreds of yards, was kind of that marshy, swampy kind of stuff. While they were there, picket duty was pretty important. And at that time, the pickets kind of fired each other often. Later in the war, they were told not to unless it was important. But early on, that's how it worked. And I read an account of Corporal David Weatherwax that he sent to the Daily Saratogian, and then I'll read an account of, time-wise, I think I'll just go with Wheeler's experience. This is the second day after they arrived at Lee's Mills. The second day, at night, my company and 4 others of the regiment were sent on picket. We stayed on 2 nights and a day and a half without being relieved, and the last night it rained, and we had a very uncomfortable time as we could not keep any fire, as we were so near the enemy. The second night, the boys all went to sleep on their posts. I could not keep them awake, nor myself either. We were so worn out with the watching. It was the same with all the other companies. The men would lay down in the water and then go to sleep. When they were so cold, they could hardly stand up. But the worst part of it was that the rebels gave us more shot and shell than we wanted. Our picket line was on the edge of a marshy stream, that's the Warwick, and the line of the rebels on the other edge, about 150 yards from us. Their forts back a little from the stream and very near us. My men were posted before the light between large trees and could not be relieved until the dark again, for if a man showed himself outside his tree, he was sure to get a rifle shot very near his head. As soon as daylight, they commenced firing at us, and our boys returned as many shots as they gave. They fired all day, but we all escaped from their rifle bullets, although many came very near us. My boys knocked over 3 of them. We did not mind the rifle bullets much, but not so the grape shot and shells, which they commenced throwing at us from the fort. One of the shells burst near us, a piece of which tore the leg off of Private Francis Jeffords, he's Company C, one of my company, and so mangled that it had to be cut below the knee. My rifle shots came near me as I exposed myself to get a shot at them. I got behind a log and shot twice at a Secesh. Don't know whether I hit him or not, but I know that he ran as fast as his legs would carry him out of danger behind a tree. I had to crawl away on my belly like a snake back into the woods, again from logs, as they knew I was behind it and were watching for it. They saw me and gave me a shot when I got up, and I ran as fast as I could for a tree. That, I guess, that would have been the closest to a battle that Wheeler and the 77th had gone to at that time. After John Magruder, who was the commanding officer of the Confederates, withdrew from Warwick, the Warwick line, the Army of Potomac followed. They caught up to Magruder at Williamsburg. They were defeated, retreated somewhat more. And then the 77th, who was the head of the column that was approaching the village of Mechanicsville, got into their first real fight. Now you would call it a skirmish, but for them, it was one heck of a battle. It was at Mechanicsville, May 7th, 1862. And here's Luther's account of the fight, that he wrote a letter to his mother. Last Friday, our brigade only had orders to march without knapsacks. We started at 3 p.m. and advanced towards the enemy. After going about 4 miles, our regiment was thrown in advance as skirmishers. We passed through 2 swamps and a number of fields and were in vicinity of the Rebs near the little village of Mechanicsville when we halted for the night, it being dark and not safe to advance any further. Captain Wheeler's battery of artillery then came up and his pieces were posted so as to cover our force. My Company C and Company A were then sent on picket and posted very near the enemy. They shot at us a number of times during the night, which was not passed in a comfortable manner, as we were wet through to the body after wading through the swamps we had passed. Besides, the night was cold and our overcoats and blankets were left behind. At daylight, our regiment came up. We were drawn off and joined it and advanced towards the little village in support of a line of skirmishers of the 33rd Regiment, which was in the 77th Brigade. We had gone but a short distance, and just as we raised up on a little knoll, the enemy let into us with grape shot with a cannon a short distance off. We had orders to lay down, which order was obeyed with alacrity, but the Rebs still gave us showers of shot and shell. 1 man was killed in Company I, and another slightly wounded in other companies. Every man could tell that he came very near being hit. After a while, our artillery got into position and we changed our place to a less exposed point. And then the artillery opened on them, and it pleased us much more to see our shells go crashing through the houses and bursting among them to have them come from their side to us. After the artillery had given them a good number of shells, our regiment was ordered to take the village with the bayonet. My company and Company B were thrown out as skirmishers. Then the regiment charged the place with a yell and went in without opposition. The rebels broke and run before we came anywhere near the farm. There were 2 regiments of them. They left all their knapsacks and blankets. I have a very fine one I found thrown away. The houses are all deserted. We went in one and found all the sugar and eggs we wanted. My orderly found $4 in gold on the mantelpiece they had forgotten to take in a hurry to leave. We stayed near the place until yesterday when we were relieved by General Stoneman, We stayed near the place until yesterday when we were relieved by General Stoneman from the 3rd Corps. After that, they moved up to the Chickahominy, stayed there for a month, almost a full month, and staying there, malaria became a primary problem. They felled many, many soldiers in the Army, and it certainly hurt the 77th. George Stevens, who was a surgeon, gave a description of what he saw. Men were falling along with malaria and typhoid. Diarrhea and other miasmatic maladies became almost universal. Men who worked at the breastworks one day would be found in the hospitals on the next day, next burning with fever, tormented with insatiable thirst, racked with pains, or wild with delirium. Their parched lips, the teeth blackened with swords, the hot breath and sunken eyes, the sallow skin and trembling pulse, all telling of the violent workings of disease. Stevens continued day after day. Scores of brave men who had left their northern homes to aid in the hour of the country's need were borne to lowly graves along the banks of that fatal river. Hospital steamers plied constantly from White House to Washington, Alexandria, and Philadelphia, bearing thousands of these victims of disease, and many with stoic indifference lay down in their shelter tents and gave themselves up to death, without even applying to comrades for surgeons for assistance. Everywhere to the north, men were seen on cars and steamers, on the streets and in the houses, whose sallow countenances, emaciated appearance, and tottering steps marked them as victims of Chickahominy fever. Express cars groaned with the weight of coffins containing the remains of youth who but a few months before had gone to war in the pride of their strength, and had now yielded not to the bullets of the enemy, but the grim spirit which hovered over their death. But when the 77th left for the peninsula, they had about 1,000 men. By June 14th, they were down to 275. All the company officers but Wheeler were sick, and he effectively was in command of the regiment at that time.
Mostly disease.
Huh?
Mostly disease.
Yeah. Well, way more people died of disease than the battles, which is impressive, right? All right. So the Army of the Potomac made it right to the outskirts of Richmond. At the time, Johnson was the commander of the Confederate forces, and he kicked off what became the 7 Days Battles. On the 25th of June, he started a fight. It was at Oak Grove. It was a draw. Then he was wounded, and Robert E. Lee became commander of the Confederate armies. And he hit the Army of the Potomac, Mechanicsville, 626, Gaines Mills, 627, Garnett and Golding, 627 through 28, Savage Station, 629, Glendale, 630, and Malvern Hill, 71. The biggest experience they had of battle was at White Oak Swamp. I'll give you a little bit of what his experience was there when he wrote to his brother Frank. Give me here. Okay. There was some of the most terrible fighting the world has ever seen before and during the retreat. Some regiments were entirely cut to pieces. One regiment into the Battle of White Oak Swamp and came out with only a captain and 2 privates. All the rest were killed and wounded and taken prisoner. Our regiment has always been lucky. We lost during the retreat only 1 killed, 4 or 5 wounded, and a dozen or so prisoners. Although we were present at every battle, at Savage's Station, we did not come under fire at all. And at the Battle of White Oak, we with our division were exposed to the fire of 30 pieces of artillery for half a day. But not a man in our regiment was hurt, although many were killed and some others. Mott's battery, which we had supported, lost all of its horses and half its men, and the pieces were all disabled, but were all taken off the field except one. Mott took his private team and drew them off after dark. You could have no idea the noise made by 40 or 50 pieces of artillery revved up as they were during this battle. It was continual roar, and the air seemed full of the hissing missiles which are bursting over our heads and scattering their death-dealing fragments. The rebels hoped by suddenly opening with their marked batteries to cause a stampede, and were successful with one regiment, the 20th New York, and our brigade, Colonel Mac Weber's Dutch regiment, considered the best drilled in the service, which broke and ran to the rear, and most of them did not stop until they reached the James, They were arrested by the provost marshal and marched to headquarters in disgrace. Our regiment stood like veterans, as we always have in dangerous places. We are considered to be a very reliable regiment and had a name coming in from the retreat as in good order as in any other army. We had few stragglers. Our regiment is small, but we have left our good men, the cowards' old home, sick as they stay.
Not.
That was about the time that McClellan decided to retreat. He was certainly scared of Lee, and so their retreat was down to Harrison's Landing. It was a lot of hard marching, rain, difficult time. By the time the 77th got there, they were so tired they just laid down at a clover field somewhere and slept the night and part of the next day. I'm gonna just jump right to Antietam. I'm looking at our time. I wanna make sure we can get that. As you all know, the 77th was in the Battle of Antietam. It was a very bloody day, the bloodiest day of the Civil War. Close to 24,000 casualties in that battle. Imagine how many people died of wounds later on, and then subsequent disease later on. So what I'm going to do is read to you letters he sent to his brother Frank, his mother, and then Frank again, describing what that battle was. The 77th arrived on the battle around 12:30, 1 o'clock. It had already been raging for hours up in the cornfield, in the Dunker Church, back and forth, back and forth. The 77th crossed at Price Ford, and they double quick to the scene of the battle. And if you know where Price Ford is, it's nothing but uphill and very steep hills to get to the plain where the battlefield was. I don't know how they did that and could still go into battle, but they did. The commanding general, as I told you, was drunk. He just kind of sent regiments in willy-nilly. He sent the 77th up on an angle of skirmishers towards the Hagerstown Pike. And when they got up there, they realized they were separated from the rest of the regiment. So they wheeled left and started double-quicking down the Hagerstown Pike to the Dunker Church. Halfway there were two North Carolina regiments that they didn't see, and the Carolinians started shooting. 35 men were wounded or killed in that battle, but they stuck there. They fired back a few times and then withdrew just below the Dunker Church. It is a little bit of a swale there. But this is what Wheeler remembered. I was in the great battle fought near the village of this to his brother, on the Battle of Sharpsburg on the 17th, and came out sound, but thousands of poor fellows on both sides fell. For the last 2 weeks, we have been marching through Maryland after the rebels. Our corps had a fight with them at Burkittsville, at Crampton's Gap, and drove them out, but my brigade was not engaged. We reached the field of Sharpsburg on the morning of the 17th. The battle then was in the open fields of 5 miles. Hundreds of pieces of artillery were belching forth their thunder. Long lines of men were charging the enemy, and the enemy charging back in return. It was a splendid sight, for we could see it all. We were rushed in at a double quick and charged the enemy, driving them some distance and holding the ground. After that, we laid down behind a sheltering ridge between the batteries of the enemies and ours. The fight on our part of the field was confined after this to terrible cannonading over our heads, which was dangerous, as the great fell among the men. A number were killed and were wounded. And the next one is to his mother. I think she seemed to have lost the page here. Hang on. Okay, to his mother. Same day he wrote. Things were looking bad for us just then, for our men were being drove. Our brigade was immediately ordered in and charged the enemy and drove him from a large field, a cornfield. We were in all day and lost 40 men killed and wounded out of the 150 we went in with. We had been double quick so far to reach the field that half had fallen out before going into battle. So they had about 75, 80 men when they finally were in the fight. I went in with 17 in my company and 7 were wounded but none killed. Gris Bushnell was wounded in the foot by a shell, but not badly. He is the only one in my company whom you know is hurt. I came out without a scratch. Captain Horton was struck by a piece of shell in the thigh and got a deep flesh wound, but is not dangerous. He was doing first rate yesterday. 2 other officers were wounded, one very badly. There is not but 7 officers left with the regiment now. The next day after the battle was occupied by both sides in picking up the wounded. A flag of truce was sent in by the enemy for the purpose. Yesterday morning, the enemy had retreated and we were closely followed by our forces and some taken prisoners before they crossed the river. And again to Frank, and this is a longer read. Is it all right me just reading some of these for you? Is that to hear his words? Okay, I want to make sure. I don't want to just bore you with reading. Okay, this is a long letter, so bear with me. As we are resting for a day, I will write you an account of our operations during the short campaign in Maryland. On the evening of September 6th, we marched through Washington and Georgetown and halted until morning. As we hurried through the city and sidewalks were crowded with citizens who cheered us on and told us to drive the rebels out of Maryland. For a day or two, most of the Army of the Potomac and Virginia were being hurried to the upper Potomac, leaving the new troops to guard the fortifications around Washington. From the time we left Alexandria, we were marching every day in the direction of Harper's Ferry, passing through the most beautiful country I ever saw. On the 13th, we crossed the Blue Ridge. The view from the summit was very fine. A great valley lay spread out on either side, and we could see the city of Frederick to the north and Harper's Ferry to the south. We stayed that night in the village of Jefferson. The rebels had left us as our advance came in. The people were a very strong union, gave the soldiers anything they had and would take no pay in return. The next day we marched towards the next range of mountains, crossed the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and encountered the enemy at Burkittsville Gap. At the same time, there was a great battle being fought a little to the north at South Mountain, which Fox's Gap, by Burnside. Most of our corps went in and drove the enemy from the gap in style. He had a very strong position, and the prisoners say they thought they could hold against any force. But Slocum's division and the Vermont boys made them run. On the 16th, heavy cannonading was heard all day over the mountain in direction of Sharpsburg. On the morning of the 17th, we made a forced march and arrived on the field at noon. The battle was then hot all along the lines for 5 miles. Our men would lose ground and regain it, and by the most desperate charges, hundreds of cannon were sending forth their iron messengers of death on either side, making a noise that shook the ground for miles. Antietam was once called the artillery hell because there were hundreds and hundreds of pieces of artillery blasting through the entire battle. I know if I go to a reenactment and they blow off one of those cannons, you get a little vibration in your chest, you know. That feels good, but they're only using half the charge of what they would use when there's a real battle, so I cannot imagine the sound. I sure can imagine the ground shaking. The battle was on open fields so that the contending forces could be seen like a panorama from our position on rising ground. It was a splendid sight to see, but I hope I may never see another like it. The ground in every direction was thickly strewn with the dead and dying, some of them terribly mutilated by cannon shot. With such a view before us, we were ordered at a double quick to the front, at a point where the ground had been won and lost twice by our forces. Our brigade was quickly formed in line and ordered to charge the enemy. We went in at a run and drove the enemy in great confusion from the field, but not before about 400 out of 2,000 in our brigade had fallen killed or wounded. We held the ground behind a little ridge while the batteries on both sides played over our heads, making it very unsafe for us, for the grape and canister fell among us, killing and wounding another. 7 were wounded in my company, none fatal. Captain Horton received a deep flesh wound in the thigh from a rebel shell. He wasn't shot in the thigh, he got shot in the butt. They're just being nice about that. And it really was more than a flesh wound. He came back. It took him a while to recover here in Boston Spa. I guess you don't want to tell me when he got shot in the butt, right? Okay. So Lieutenant Ansel Dennison and Company K and Lieutenant Robert Skinner were quite severely wounded. Dennison died a day or two later. Skinner spent quite a time in a hospital and was discharged because his wound was so severe. Night came at last and the contest ended. We laid on our arms that night, expecting the battle would commence again in the morning. But morning came and neither party seemed disposed to renew the bloody work. Parties went to work picking up the wounded who were crying for water to everyone who came near them. In the afternoon, the rebels sent in a flag of truce to leave to pick up their wounded, which was granted. It was a strange sight to see parties from either side talking friendly to each other, when the day before each had been intent to slay the other. At night, the wounded had all been picked up and most of our killed buried. I always thought that was something, fighting and killing each other, but then, it's all over, let's have a chat, right? We'll talk about whatever, yesterday, today. It just amazes me that's how it went. The next bit for them in terms of battle was at Fredericksburg. The battle was from December 11th to December 15th. The 77th was involved, but mostly it was just reserve. They supported 6th Corps artillery. It was not pleasant because they had to stand there. And the whole time there's artillery barrage against them. I'll just read a very quick description of that, of what it was like. Okay, this is Wheeler on the 18th writing to his mother. I wrote you a few lines the 15th to let you know I was safe. That night, as you know, the Grand Army was drawn in safely across the Rappahannock. I will give you a history of the whole thing as far as I saw. At 3 o'clock in the morning, 11th, we left our camp near Belle Plaine and marched towards the river. We reached the hills that overlooked the city and river at daylight. We could now see the ground we were to advance over. The enemy was posted on a ridge of hills commanding the city and overlooking the plains below. That range of hills is called Maurice Heights. It was directly in back of Fredericksburg. The hills on our side were covered with artillery, which early in the morning opened a terrible fire on the city, soon setting on fire in many places. Under the cover of this artillery fire, General Sumner on the right and Franklin on the left threw 4 pontoon bridges across the stream. Towards night, our troops crossed in sufficient numbers to hold the bridges until morning. On the morning of the 12th, our division, followed by most of the army, crossed and formed a line of battle, advancing about a mile from the bridges until we gained the crest in the plain, where all of our artillery is posted, and the infantry formed in 3 lines in the rear. From this point, the plain inclined towards the enemy, who were posted about a mile distance in the woods on all hillsides. To advance further would expose us to the crossfire of artillery, no protection of ground, so our artillery all along the lines opened on the enemy to drive them out, and the latter returned as good as they received. They had us completely at their mercy, for they could pitch their shells anywhere they pleased. So the 77th Division was like in the middle, facing Fredericksburg. There was an assault in the north, assault in the south. First assault was the south, and the 77th Wheeler, they could see the whole thing. See the, particularly General Meade's division advancing, being blown to smithereens because they're out in the open and having, artillery, disappeared into the woods. They knew things were happening there, and they came out totally devastated. They were routed. And to the north later on, you know what happened with Burnside. He sent people up to the stone sunken wall, right? Up and down, brigade after brigade, and they were all slaughtered. And that's pretty much what Wheeler saw. The slaughter in the south, the slaughter in the north. Well, after the battle, they spent a nice winter, and things didn't Wheeler got to go home for a brief furlough. When he came back, Lincoln had replaced Burnside with Joe Hooker, Fighting Joe Hooker. You know how he got the name Fighting Joe Hooker? Right? He says a telegram, Fighting Joe Hooker.
Okay.
So he became Fighting Joe Hooker. Well, anyway, he replaced Burnside on the 25th. And he developed a plan to get after Lee. The lines were static at Fredericksburg, and north had retreated across the Rappahannock. Lee still had men all on the heights. Hooker thought that he could go up north the river, cross over, come down and catch Lee on his right flank. In the meantime, he held the 6th Corps, which the 77th was in, at Fredericksburg to keep Early's division pegged down, but also as if it went well, Hooker be pushing Lee down, 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 and then the 6th Corps could come and he just like hit them together like that. It didn't work, but that was the plan. So on the 30th, Hooker sent the 5th, 9th, and 12th Corps to the intersection of Orange Turnpike and Orange Plank Road, which is dominated by the Chancellorsville Tavern. Now we're talking about the Battle of Chancellorsville. On May 1st, Lee gathered his army. He divided it and pushed his main force to confront Hooker. And as I said, he left Early's division to hold the line at Fredericksburg. On the 2nd of May, Jackson smashed into Hooker's right, shattering the 11th Corps. Hooker was earlier in the day leaning against one of the pillars of the porch of the tavern. Cannonball hit that, knocked him senseless, but he was awake enough to say, we need to retreat. So he starts to pull back. His fellow generals didn't agree with it, but that's what happened. On the 3rd of May, Lee broke Hooker's line, and Hooker withdrew his army back across the river. Now, the 77th was with the 6th Corps, pinning Early at the heights. May 3rd, Sedgwick was ordered to take his corps and to take the heights. Having earlier crossed the Rappahannock, the 6th Corps was in line of battle. Wheeler's division was commanded by Albion Howe, and they were drawn up south of Hazel Run into 2 battle lines. The 77th were skirmishers. To give you a sense, they're like in the middle again. There's the northern part directly across the Fredericksburg. They're sort of in between, and there's some forces down a little bit further south. While the 77th was on the skirmish line, French dismounted from his horse, Windsor French, commanding, and was standing by his side. His arm was slung over the saddle, just kind of relaxing, when he heard a zip, and a mini ball hit the brass part of the pommel on his saddle, ricocheted off, and wounded a guy in Company C behind him. Wheeler was standing there with French, and he said to him, well, that was a pretty close call for you, Colonel. And in French, rather nonchalantly, says, yeah, but as long as they don't get in near, I'm all right.
Yeah, good.
I almost can't imagine being that relaxed when there's a battle going on. You're going in. I know I wouldn't be that relaxed. I'd probably be one of those that thought, I'm going this way, you go that way, I'm going this way. But that, you're not supposed to do that. Anyway, shortly after that, a signal was sent to charge the heights. And as they charged across the open plain, Confederate artillery on Howison's property, Telegraph Hill and Willis Hill, opened up. The 77th was directing its way up to Telegraph Hill. Captain Orrin Rugg wrote, over the plain we went under a heavy fire of musketry, grape, and canister whizzing all around me. Corporal Edwin Lawrence thought it was the most terrific storm of iron and lead that man could stand. Sergeant Lyman Vandenberg remembered, as we advanced, they shelled us terrifically, and as we neared the heights, they used grape and canister, which fell around us like hail. After about going 500 yards, they were at the base of the heights, the base of Telegraph Hill, and at that time, the artillery fire and musketry was so heavy, the 77th dropped down in a ditch to just kind of rest a little bit. The ditch was mostly filled with water. Private Erskine Branch, I don't know why he did this, but he was in there and he thought, I probably shouldn't have my gun loaded while I'm in here, so he fired it off. I'm not sure why, and it blew him back and into the water and filled his boots, right? Later on, as they set out again up the hill, Branch was hit by a shot, tore off most of his left leg, and a couple guys came and helped him out, and he hopped off the field with us singing the Star Spangled Banner until he finally got to a field hospital and he was taken care of. So after a brief stop in the ditch, they carried on. Corporal Augustus Walker was immediately hit on the knee by a shell fragment. He was in Wheeler's company. Wheeler saw him and said, "You're a lucky fellow, Walker, and may get out of this alive." Gaining the crest of Telegraph Hill, Rugg said, "Here we tried to get our regiment together and give them a little rest, as the men were so tired they could go no further." Has anybody gone to Fredericksburg and seen the best? Do you remember the hill to Telegraph Hill? Steep. I don't know how they got up that hill with all of that, musketry and cannon and all that. I would have to stop 5 times when there's no battle to get that hill. It is very steep. Anyway, so they're tired. They're trying to take a rest, but the Confederates don't oblige them at all. They were, some had retreated to the Leach House. There was artillery there, and what was left of a couple of Mississippi regiments. Well, they began to shower the 77th with shot and canister again. French called the 77th back into battle and turned to face the Confederates at Leach House. Standing to the right of Company C, and this comes from that short manuscript attached to the bylaws of the GAR, Luther Wheeler Post. Luther was standing on the right of the Company C. He yelled, "Forward, men!" And as he started forward, Confederate mini ball struck him just below the belt buckle, just below. And he exclaimed, "I am shot." Corporal Walker and Private John Cousins carried Wheeler 200 yards behind the line of battle. From there, he was put in an ambulance. He was taken to a field hospital, which was in a large mansion somewhere in Fredericksburg. After the battle, Chaplain Norman Fox had him embalmed and shipped him express back to Saratoga. I'll tell you what express is. It's sort of like American Express, but in terms of shipping. It was a big business. You could send private packages to your loved ones. They could send stuff back to their loved ones, and that's the way you did shipping back and forth. Normally it was, here's some fruit and some cake for you, that kind of thing. Well, when you died, you're shipped express back to your hometown if you could afford it and if you could get the body, because sometimes that wasn't going to happen either. The people in Saratoga at the time only knew that Luther was wounded. They didn't know he was killed. So when they knew he was coming back to Saratoga, there was a big crowd gathered at the station, just waiting to greet him. You can imagine what they thought when his casket came out. Just a shock and shudder through the crowd. I could kind of hear this kind of feeling, that shock. As I said, few were expected to hear this. The newspaper, the Daily Saratogian, wrote an article, and this is what they said about Luther. "All remember the manly bearing of the youth who, 18 months since, as first lieutenant of Company C, assisted in the organizing of the 77th Regiment. They recollected his fine form and noble presence, his aptitude for command, and excellence in military drill, and all had predicted a bright future for him in the dangerous service to which he was going forth. These expectations have been fulfilled. He rose early to command of a company, becoming at age 22 senior captain of his regiment. The promising youth had developed into a brave, gallant, and skillful officer. His courage had been proven on a dozen battlefields. He was known to be the idol of his men and one of whom the regiment was justly proud. And is it not strange that the loss of such a noble and worthy young man should have excited a deep and bitter sorrow in the village of his residence?" The next day, the community got together and planned his funeral. On the day of his funeral, there was a procession a quarter-mile long, which proceeded from Luther's parents' house, where his body laid in state. I wish I knew where the house was, but I don't know. The hearse was drawn by 4 gray horses. It carried his Four gray horses carried his coffin remains down Broadway. The streets were lined with people on both sides, nearly the whole population of the village and hundreds from the country being out. After the funeral, they went to Greenwich Cemetery for the committal service. There were about 3,000 mourners in the cemetery. And you wonder, how did they see, just where do they fit? I mean, could they even see what's going on? Well, if you know where his grave is, it's down on a flat, and there's like this big hill, like almost, that's where they all were, surrounded up there and then close by. Colonel McKean, who had earlier known Wheeler when they recruited and first started, he said a few words after this. He says, "Bury now this young hero of 10 battles. He comes back to us from the horrid front of war. Bury him in this peaceful, beautiful cemetery. And there are others, as well as his own relations, who will sometimes come here and muse with uncovered heads where he so sweetly sleeps. Others, as well as they, who will plant spring flowers on his grave. Others, as well as they, who will keep his memory green in their hearts' best affections. His duty is done. Lay him down and let him sleep till the reveille of resurrection." Luther was very good friends with Lieutenant Colonel Windsor B. French, who was then the commander of the brigade. Commander of the regiment. He wrote a letter to Luther's family, and I'd like to read the letter to you. "I do not know as I'm doing you a favor by recalling your minds to the death of your son and brother, after time has healed in some measure your deep grief. Still I feel I should be unjust to the dead did I not express to you the respect and love I had for him while living. I've been acquainted with the captain for more than 2 years. My association had always been of the most confidential character, and his loss to me as a friend and associate at arms is irreparable. As I sit in my tent these days, I often think, where is Captain Wheeler? It comes to me like a cloud, and I feel as though I had lost unnecessary support. But he has gone. He died as he lived, a noble soldier and a brave man. He knew no such thing as fear, and the pride of his heart seemed to be the post of duty and danger. He was ardent in the cause for which he sacrificed his love. My friends, accept my warmest sympathy in your bereavement. You have lost a son and brother, but his memory will be a pride to you forever. He has gone but a day before us, and he has scaled the heights of heaven and is reaping the reward of his victory. Oh, it is glorious to die, and for such a cause. His example is written in letters of crowning light, and the poorest servants of God will read it in a great lesson of nobleness and patriotism. Then wipe away your tears. Let not grief occupy your hearts. You make this sacrifice for your country. How many have given a son in this glorious cause? A cause so sacred demands a sacrifice commensurate. God is blessing your son in heaven, and a generous people are paying tribute to his memory. God bless you in your grief and make you strong in your country's cause. Not long after the funeral, Luther's father received a letter from Lieutenant Gilbert Thomas, who was in the regiment, who knew him well. Thomas told of an apparent presentiment that Luther had about his looming death. Thomas remarked, Thomas said that just before the battle, that Wheeler remarked, "If we cross the river, I shall be wounded or killed." He told Captain Stephen Horton he should be killed in the Battle of the Second Fredericksburg. To Lieutenant Lawrence van Denmark, who also reported that Luther was depressed, said, "I know I'll be killed in the next battle." Van Denmark replied to Luther, "Captain, you better go with me, for you have not been well for a week. And the doctor says you're unfit for duty." Looking at Van Denmark, Wheeler said, "I can go, and I do not want my men to go where I do not go myself. Goodbye, Van. You will never see me again. I'm glad you're going to the hospital, for I think you would be shot too if you went into the fight." I don't know if it's true, but that's what was sent. Could be, yeah. Well, that's it.